All right, so to see where things are, and not everything is currently visible, but all the main points are visible, and the things that are not visible, they've got little things that say coming soon. Okay, so if you come into the our main Canvas page here, there's a couple different ways you can access the information for the test. You can go directly to test, and if you go directly to test, it actually pulls up this page right here, which is what we had before we went online. Excuse me. Now that we've gone online, I also have all the extra little links. So for example, down here on our final exam, we have the study guide that went up, and then the practice test for the exam is not available yet. When it is, it'll come right here. And then this link right here links us to the main page where you'll be able to find everything for the final exam. But let me show you the other way to get to there, because you actually don't have to ever come to this page if you don't want to. Oops. So if you're here and you go to online information, or if you're on your mobile app and you go under modules, either way, you'll get to this next bit right here. And at the topic is stuff that at this point we know how to do, how to contact me, and the thing for final exam is right here. And both today, as well as if you actually come down here to May 5th, we'll just link you back to this guy. So this is really the only page you need. In here is where you have everything. This is the stock thing that we've had every time we've had an online test. So just make sure you have to respond to on whatever machine or browser you're using. Stuff before the final exam, so study guides, etc. Study guide for the final exam is right here. What I was just doing this morning was reopening all of your guys' practice tests for tests 1, 2, and 3. And what isn't currently visible here, but will be probably after we stop talking with each other today, is I'll go ahead and put in links for those prior practice exams, just so you can go back and have more things to look at if you want to. What should also be done right now, and I'm not sure if it took or not just because I can't see everything that's in the student view, you should be able to go back in and see how you did on test 2 as well. Okay. I'm not sure that took. If it didn't and you can't access your test 2, specifically where you took the test, not where your grade is currently recorded, but the actual place where you went in and worked all those problems. If you can't access that and see what you got right, what you got wrong, feel free to reach out to me and I'll see if I can't fix the settings. I'm planning on doing that same thing of making it so you can see how you did on test 3 as well, but that's not going to happen until after I go back through test 3 and make sure that Canvas graded everything correctly. So I'm hoping to get that available to you guys tomorrow, May 1st at the latest. What else? Oh, once we get to the point where you're actually going to take the final exam, I'll go in, and if I need to adjust anything in terms of directions, I'll put it right here for you guys. This is also going to be on the final exam itself. I don't know if you guys will need any scratch work, but I went ahead and added an assignment right here. If you did any work on paper and you want me to see it, that you can go ahead and select this button. It'll take you to a separate assignment. That's not available right now, but will be during our time slot for the final exam, where you can just upload any of your scratch work right there. It has to be a separate link, just because when we use our Respondus thing, you have to, you can't upload anything. All right, so it looks like you guys checked out test 2, and it still requires Respondus to look at the responses. Okay. I'll look about seeing taking off that Respondus restriction, but that implies to me that you should be able to still see the responses even if you have to log into the Respondus thing. Crossing my fingers that that's what that still means. Where was I? Right, so this button right here would take you to the actual final exam. What I did for the final exam is our time slot for our final exam is 11 a.m. to 1:30 p.m. on Tuesday, May 5th. So what I did is I made it so that the final exam is open a bit before that, so about an hour and a half before that, and it'll stop being available about an hour and a half after that. That way, if you need to adjust when you actually take the final exam, you totally can. Just like with the other online test, you'll have 2 attempts. The purpose of the second attempt is simply in case you have any technical issues, but you have 2 attempts. You don't have to tell me why you take the second attempt. So for example, if you, for whatever reason, just had a total brain freeze, you get out of the first final exam and you got like a 20 or something, it's totally cool to, if you have time left, to go back and try to take it again. Now, that being said, I'm definitely not going to recommend you take a final exam twice in a row because that's more work than I expect you to do. But it's there. If you want to go for it, go for it. In terms of timing, I'll give you guys 3 hours. So you know when you started the online test in the past, they have a time. Well, I went ahead and gave you guys 3 hours. Roughly speaking, I was thinking the normal 2.5-hour slot plus 15 minutes in the beginning, plus 15 minutes at the end. So that gives you enough time, extra time to deal with technology stuff. That being said, I doubt you guys will need the full 3 hours. Typically in the past, if this thing times out somewhat similar to past final exams, most people are done in the 1.5 to 2 hour mark is typical. That being said, I've never given the final exam in an online version before, so what I found with both Test 2 and Test 3 is for some people the online version, it's faster, you get done a lot faster, and for some people it takes a little bit longer to figure out how to enter your answers. So how it goes with you specifically, I don't know. One of the things I also did is I went ahead and put a due date on the test, and this is similar to what I did for Test 3. And all that does is it'll pop up the assignment or the final exam link in your calendar or your schedule or wherever it is that you guys track assignments that's automated through Canvas. This due date, you don't have to worry about it. It's not going to affect your grade in any way, shape, or form. It's only so that you can see this final exam pop up in those other places. Okay. But that's the details in terms of how to find things and some of the technology side. Any questions before we shuffle ourselves over to the topic side of things? Okay. In that case, let me switch over to sharing this study guide for you guys. So this guy, whoops, let me get rid of that notice. All right, so this is a study guide that is currently up in Canvas. It went up, I don't remember what time yesterday. I want to say in the early evening. So if you haven't seen it yet, no worries. It is there. It's available. And anything we write on it today, I'll go and post it as the updated version. Okay. So overarchingly speaking, I don't actually make the final exam for our course twice as long as a normal test. If this was paper, how it relates out goes roughly as follows. A normal in-class paper test is 5 pages, somewhere between 5 to 10 questions. For the final exam, I normally do 6 or 7 pages, so that gives you an extra, typically 1 to 3 questions. Okay. For us, this is the first semester we've had in a long time where the final exam, it will be purely cumulative, so you can literally look at all of your information from test 1, 2, and 3, and there will be no new information on the final exam. Okay. What that also means is if you do better on the final exam than one of your other tests, I'll go ahead and replace that lower test score with a final exam score. So if you've been worried about a low test score, do well in the final, and it'll counteract any of that issue. That doesn't happen if the final exam isn't fully cumulative normally, or at least it's typically why I don't put that in a syllabus. All right, so we already talked about specific details. So what I did for us is I pulled it down from saying you could see any question we've ever talked about in the entire semester to things that realistically you're actually going to see. Okay. And I put them in order of perhaps freak outness on the side of you guys. So here, first thing is proof questions. We're looking at, you're realistically going to see 2, possibly 3 proof questions, and the possibly third proof question would be a counterexample. So you'll get 1 question. That'll be a mathematical induction question. let me actually highlight this. My stylus that I normally write with, its battery died Monday, right in the middle of class. It was awesome. So I'm going to attempt to do this with no stylus. We'll see how good my coordination is with my finger here. So in terms of the mathematical induction, I went ahead and listed out that we talked about both weak induction and strong induction, or in the book that I learned it from, type 1 or type 2 induction. And then I put some examples. I believe this one was one we did in class. And then this one is in, these two are in your textbook. And I'm not assuming that you know what any of those examples right here are without looking them up in your textbook. But what it's actually going to turn out to be is an induction question that deals with an inequality. So be prepared to see one induction question, and it includes some statement where it says something like this guy right down here. If we were dealing with a sequence, that each sequence term is, wow, that looks terrible, that each sequence term is less than something. And I can't get that to go away. So maybe we will try something else. That actually really started to annoy me. We'll do that. Okay. Now, in the non-induction question, in other words, the regular or proof question, you should expect to see a direct proof. It's possible that you would see a counterexample, but that's the one that's hit or miss. In terms of what you would be seeing, realistically, you'll see the two, one induction, one a direct proof. Now, I've been looking at different formats for direct proof because we haven't had one of those yet in an online version. And I found a couple of examples that online that looked really interesting. Not really online. It was, anyway, it was a thing. It was actually an ad for another textbook. But it said that in terms of dealing with the proof questions of having, for example, all of the lines of the proof, and then having a drop down where you select which one goes first, which one goes second, which one goes third. And that seems like something that in an online setting would be easier to figure out what's going on than attempting to figure out you guys typing in a bunch of blanks. Okay. So in terms of a proof question, I would definitely think of this as likely to be something like assemble the given statements is likely what you would see. Okay. And then I gave some examples of the type of proofs that you would see. And this is just ones that you can see in the textbook right here. And all of those are similar to what we did in class, where it's things like if you add two even numbers, the sum is even. If you add two odd numbers, the sum is still even. If you add an even and an odd number, it's odd. Okay. So some of those basic type guys where what would you need? You need to make sure that you know the definition of things like even versus odd. Okay. So that would be the idea behind proofs. Any questions so far? Okay. Now the next topic that you would see, so this would be roughly speaking one question each. The next topic that you would see, and I went ahead and put both sets and counting together. And the reason for that is it's likely that you may have a question that's all on sets. And if you do have a question that's only dealing with sets, maybe it would be something where it wants you to find an operation of the union of two sets, the intersection of two sets, the complement of two sets. The additional thing here that we talked about, we also talked about symmetric differences. That's the one that had the symbol with a little triangle. But realistically, what I've done in the past is if I have a question just on sets, it'll often be something like build the power set or build the cross product of these two given sets. Okay? But most of the time when we're dealing with sets in the final exam, it's part of a bigger question. And often it's part of a question that deals with counting. So maybe the first part will be something like build such and such set. And maybe the second part would be something like, all right, well, you built this set. Well, how many different subsets do you have that have this criteria? Okay. So it might be something where the two tie in together. Now, in terms of questions here, realistically, you're probably, well, what I often do for the final exam with counting is do one question on it, and it has several parts. In an online format, you might not get just the one question. It might just be broken up into several smaller questions where it says things like, all right, suppose you have so many of something. What did we do in class? I think we did marbles one time in class. How many ways are there to pull out X number of marbles? Or if we wanted to throw pigeonhole principle in here, if you knew these marbles were all different, I don't know, say colors, since that's normally what marbles are, how many different marbles would you have to pull out of a certain color? Okay. So that would be some of the idea of the different things that you could see here. If you want to look back over previous things, we did several in-class activities on these type of guys, and I believe on test 2, we had a question that dealt with coin tossing. That question where you're dealing with coin tossing, and I think we did one similar to it in class as well, is a nice example where you have several different parts dealing with different types of guys. So like, for example, if you were tossing a coin, maybe you have something like, all right, well, how many different ways could that coin turn up if you tossed it twice? Well, you could have 2 heads, 2 tails, a head and a tail, but 2 different ways that you could have gotten a head and a tail. Or maybe it says something like, hey, how many ways can you get exactly 1 head? And that would be not all of the options, but only some of them. So that would be the idea here. And typically, like I said, I normally, if this was on paper, be 1 page, 1 question, a bunch of subparts on an online setting. Maybe it's still 1 long question with a bunch of fill in the blanks, or maybe this is broken down into a bunch of really short little questions. And if it's a bunch of little questions, it'd be probably 3 to 4 of them. Okay. In counting. The next topic deals with sequences. So we've just dealt with sequences in test 3. So you might be asked to do another one that deals with finding your closed or explicit form, similar to what you had where you had to use the characteristic equation, like what we had just recently. But realistically, what you might have now, so here's what you might be looking for, is you may be asked to build the recursive formula. So we actually did this in class, gave out all the terms of the sequence. So maybe you have something like, oh, I don't know. Let's type in a little baby example over here. Maybe you have something like 2, 5, 8, 11, and it keeps going. In this case, if you were asked to build the equation of the sequence, anybody have a guess what you would say? And this is where it would definitely need to tell you, hey, is this the recursive form or is this the closed form? So closed form, your answer would only be in terms of ends. It would look like a function. But your recursive form would be in terms of the previous term. So this one would be previous term. And what do you do to that previous term to get the next term? Anybody spot a pattern here? Assuming I didn't do a typo in one of those term numbers. Yep, so we just added 3 to get each of them. So in this particular case, the recursive formula would be this, hey, next term is last term plus 3. Key thing with recursive formula is you have this last guy. Now, if this was a paper test, I would just say find the recursive formula and you'd have to write it all out. In terms of an online test, what would likely happen is I would type so it looks nice in mathematical symbols. These guys right here, the sequence terms, and then in this case, there would be like a blank and you'd put in the plus 3. Okay. Then there might be a second part of the question, and maybe it says, hey, now find the closed form. So let me label this R for recursive. If somebody then wanted you to find the closed form of this guy, I'm just going to go ahead and give you the closed form. This one would be 2 times 3 to the n, assuming you started at n is equal to or bigger than 0. And I don't have a fast way of saying equal to or larger than, greater than or equal to in typing there. Okay? And this one would be the closed form. Okay, so that would be the type of thing that you might see now on the final as opposed to what we saw on test 3. But in terms of sequences, I've got 2 really awesome examples with sequences. Unfortunately, if you are asked to build the recursive formula, they both have a tendency to be a little bit of a time eaters. So I'm going to have to worry about timing of this guy to make sure it doesn't time out too long for you guys. But both of those 2 really awesome examples start off and have you build that recursive formula, and then from that recursive formula, go and find the closed form. So it might be something if they time out too long, maybe one of them I'd say just build your recursive formula, and maybe the other one actually go through the full process, okay? Or do a different question. In terms of number theory was this stuff where we looked at division and GCDs. So we did that a fair amount. It's also what our project 1 was dealing with. So this one here, if you get a question, you're probably only going to get one question. And if you got that question, it would be something like, use the Euclidean algorithm to calculate the GCD of these 2 numbers. Now, I've been trying to figure out how to get you guys to actually enter the Euclidean algorithm, because if you remember, this is the one where if you have, say, 2 numbers, let me get this to come back up here. So if we want to find the GCD of, say, oh, I don't know, how about 3 and 5 because I'm lazy? Okay. What do we know? They're both primes. Their GCD is definitely going to be 1. But if we use the Euclidean algorithm, I'm just going to abbreviate. This is the one where you take the larger one, you divide the smaller number into it, and then you find the remainder. In other words, you do proper division. So the question, of course, is how do we type that in? So it might be something where there's just a bunch of blank boxes that you need to type in each of these equations. The next one down here would then be pull the 3 down, and then pull the remainder from the previous line down. And then your last line down here would be where you again pull the divisor down, pull the previous remainder down, and then when you hit 0, that's the end of the Euclidean algorithm. So maybe this would be something where I would have 3 blanks where you would type in that algorithm, and or maybe it's 6 blanks where one side is the 5, the 3, the 2, and the other side is that expression of 3 times the 1 plus the 2, and I would tell you what that expression is. Okay. So that might be the idea of how to do this. Maybe there's then another box that says, all right, conclusion, what is your GCD? And maybe similar to like what we had on test 1, some question at the end that says something like, what's the least common multiple of these 2 numbers? Okay. So that would be the idea in terms of number theory. I'm only really looking at like one question there. And the only reason it would be more than one question is if it got broken up into more than one part. Okay. And then I believe this is the last section. I put them in or sort of not really order of what we did them. I went ahead and grouped relations that we did separately as well as post sets, lattices, and digraphs all together here. So they're going to be broken up. So if we look at relations, you have a question on relations, this would be similar to what we had on test 2, where you'd be given the relation. Maybe you're given the picture, the digraph, maybe you're given just the ordered pairs. It's unlikely you would be given the matrix, although I've definitely done that before in a paper copy. Online, it's definitely easier for me to type in the ordered pairs or just give you the picture of the digraph. So for relations, you want to make sure you can identify whether the relation is reflexive, irreflexive, symmetric, asymmetric, antisymmetric, or transitive. Make sure you can identify whether the relation is equivalence relation, and make sure you can handle dealing with if that equivalence classes if it is an equivalence relation. And the first, I want to say 3 or so questions on test 2 are all those type of questions. Okay? So it would be something very similar to those first couple questions from test 2. Now, this one here says be able to draw the digraph. Maybe you have an example similar to test 3, where on test 3 there was one that was a multiple choice that said identify which of these guys is your Hasse diagram. Maybe you have something similar that says identify which one of these is the digraph. Okay? Or maybe you don't if I can't figure out how to get that to work on an online version. Now, in terms of posets and Hasse diagrams, same topics that you could see that we just saw on test 3. Make sure you're comfortable with figuring out if somebody is a partial order. So that would be one thing. Make sure you're comfortable with making the Hasse diagram. Something I am contemplating right now, and I haven't decided yet, so it's sort of a 50-50 shot of whether this would happen or not. I'm contemplating giving you guys a question where one part of the question, or maybe the entirety of the question, is something where you need to upload a file where it says you make the Hasse diagram yourself, draw out the picture, whether you do it electronically or you write it out on hand and take a picture of it, and then you upload that file. If you do, you won't be able to do the file upload inside the actual final exam test. It would have to be a second add-on assignment where you would upload that file. Now, that being said, I haven't 100% decided whether to do that or not. Looking at pictures of Hasse diagrams is, I don't want to say soothing, but relatively low-key, but I would have to go through all of those by hand as well, and it would take getting your grades back at the end of the semester a little bit longer. So I am trying to decide on that one way or the other. So possibly, let me actually put that as a typed here, a possible file upload question. Make sure you're comfortable with the symbols. Symbol for isomorphic looks like an equal sign with a tilde on top. Maximum, minimal, greatest, least elements. Symbols right here for these guys. Lattices, the definition of them, meet, join. And then the symbols of the BN, the DN. And then lastly, dealing with a Boolean algebra. Something you should expect to see that was the same as on test 3. That last question on test 3 that talks about Boolean algebras. You should expect to see something either exactly the same as that question or very, very similar to that question on the final exam. And you'll probably get something similar to these guys right here as well. And I'll make sure it's not the entire test because I could easily make an entire test just on posets. But if you're looking at it, you probably have something like maybe one question that has all of these things that says something like, hey, here is your Hasse diagram of your poset. Identify the maximum, the greatest, the least, meets, joins, is this guy a lattice, etc. So similar to, I believe it was the second to last question on test 3. In terms of things to look over, I am planning on putting together a practice final exam. It hasn't happened yet, so like I mentioned at the very beginning, I have already gone back and opened up all of the practice exams from test 1, 2, and 3, and I haven't done it yet, but let me go and throw this up to you guys. But for those of you who added after I showed this before, I'm planning on putting, so this one here's our page on the final exam. I'm planning on putting links to all of those previous practice tests right here under where the practice final would be. And quite honestly, the practice final, I would probably just have pulled questions from those guys anyway. Maybe a couple of new ones if there's any new formatting to worry about. Right here. But in terms of things to study for, if you're looking for actual extra potential problems, I would definitely recommend going back over the past 3 tests. Test 1, you guys should have the hard copy of. Test 2 should be open so you can see what you got right or wrong. Test 3 will open up soon so you can see what you got, what's right or wrong. But before I do that, I have to go back and check to make sure Canvas graded everything correctly. And if there's any issues, I'll correct them. So you probably won't see Test 3 become available to see until either tomorrow or May 1st at the latest. Other good things to look at are the in-class activity questions, so those things that were on little PDFs that you guys worked together with on groups, the couple we tried while we were online, and then the far more of them that we had when we were in person. Those guys, quite honestly, some of them are probably harder than I'd put on a test, but that's sort of a good idea of questions that I pull directly out of this material. And then, of course, the in-class questions. Why? Because those guys also have to be timed to a much shorter than what your homework worries about, because I don't actually time out your homework to see how long it will take or not, which is why some of the homework takes forever and some doesn't take much time at all, because I haven't looked at that aspect. Probably should in the future. But that's everything I got in terms of talking about the study guide and things to expect. Any questions from you guys? Oh, I do have something. I believe it's this one. So this is something I normally give people, because this is actually the first semester I've done any online practice test. I normally give people this list of various questions that you could look at that's similar formatting to what I would do for a final exam. And we didn't cover all the topics on here. I've been building this over the past several years. If you guys are interested, I can go ahead and post this one. I have a solutions key that I can post with it as well. But there's lots of stuff out there if you guys are interested. So questions from you guys? All right, well, I didn't prepare anything other than just going over the study guide. Like I said, you'll have practice questions that I'll assemble specifically for the final exam itself. And also the practice tests for the past 3 tests are currently available that you can look at. What else did I say was coming? And test 2, you should be available to see your answers, what you got right or wrong right now. And test 3, that is upcoming in the next probably 2 days or so. I don't currently have any office hours scheduled between now and the final exam, but I can. What I've just been doing is when I've been working, I've been pulling up our Discord channel and then just checking to see if anybody has thrown a question in there, and that way it's not set office hours, but I can look about putting in some extra hours. So you can either contact me via email or Discord at any point in time. But would you guys prefer me to set some specific times for office hours? Would that be helpful? All right, I'm not seeing anybody really going for office hours as long as I'm monitoring Discord. Okay. Yeah, no, I actually, my classes on Monday and Wednesday have really taken to Discord. I think that's partly because we also have a preceptor for that class. He's actually currently answering questions over there. And yeah, no, it's one of the nice things is if you ask questions and you have a common question, everybody else in the class can be like, hey, yeah, that's the answer to that question that I also had. So I'm perfectly happy if you guys ask your questions in Discord, and then if you know the answer to somebody's question, feel free to answer it as well. Okay? But what I currently have is I've got it so the notices get pushed to both my phone and it should be on my desktop. So I should be able to get and answer your questions relatively quickly through there. Same deal with email though too. And if you guys have any specific questions on grades, feel free to email me, but you do have to email me through a UNCC email account or through Canvas. Otherwise, I can't actually talk to you about grades. It's a whole confidentiality thing. And I don't think our grades are 100% accurate on Canvas right now, but that's one of the things I'm going to go through and update as well. Soonish. If not, I'll just put in an assignment that says this is your current grade, as opposed to getting all the individual details perfect. Okay. But like I said, that's everything I have got, everything that I prepped out for the final exam.